All right, let's go to Glenn Ignazio. He's a military expert, retired Air Force Special Operations Commander. Glenn, thanks for your time. Look, according to Israel, the strikes were approved after an officer saw what he thought was a weapon being held by part of the aid group, someone in the aid group. Is that enough to warrant a strike?
It really comes down with the rules of engagement that are defined by the IDF. And in all honesty, that is a tough thing to do. We've experienced this in Iraq and Afghanistan with U.S. forces. And what we normally did was we had individuals on the ground verifying these targets before these targets were taken out. Gaza is much more complicated than that, but we have seen that the rules of engagement have been questionable, where we saw Israelis and the IDF accidentally kill 3 hostages earlier in the conflict. This is one of the things about how they put weapons on bear on a target that need to be verified, and they have been heavy-handed, like it or not.
Yeah, with the situation where you had the hostages who were misidentified, at least you had people on the ground. They were looking through scopes at the time, but at least they were on the ground. In this case, they were relying on grainy footage that was aerial footage, and so it wasn't clear.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my understanding as well. And why some of those sensors that we have are very well, the idea of understanding what is going to go on or what is happening in that vehicle is tough. Again, to reference historically, we had the same issue where in the past in Iraq, there was a weapon fired against a crowd, and they thought it was a rocket propelled grenade. It was actually a tripod of a media individual. This was one of the things that changed our rules of engagement back then, that we had to have visual confirmation on the ground or validation of that target. And that's the same thing. These are things that have been learned in history and should be applied here in Gaza as well.
Okay, so we don't know what details are going to come about the border that they're going to open. Right now, we're hearing it will be the border that is in the northern part of Gaza that opens into Israel. What do you think needs to happen around that to make it happen? And will that sort of be enough to satisfy the Americans?
Well, right now, I don't think there's much that's going to really satisfy both the United States and the international community because of how long this is going. There is a lot of suffering, and nobody supports or wants suffering. That's a fact. What has been one of the cases, and I have to agree with this, is that they want to make sure that there's no weapons or anything that is going to benefit Hamas in any of these supplies that are on the trucks going through. Now, with that being the case, I think the international community and many other agencies that are trusted by Israel could actually go through and verify this to move a large volume of trucks into the area. So that's something that could accelerate this. I think that seeing more of these coalition, or I would say, excuse me, coalition, but allied partners, Israel being more involved is the most critical thing. And we don't really see that in this place.
Are there aid organizations that Israel does trust? Because they're not very happy with the United Nations group there. This was World Central Kitchen, sponsored by a well-known chef, and this happened. Are there aid organizations that Israel can entrust to check out what is coming in across that border?
Yeah, I think that's very questionable, especially with, UNRWA, where we had, unfortunately, those individuals that were part of taking care of and helping the Palestinians that were actually part of the attack on October 7th. So I think Israel, especially in this military operation, is not really trusting other organizations. But like I said, U.S. personnel could be able to assisting in this, and many other organizations, or at least, allies to Israel. So I think that would be one of the ways that we could improve it and then validate any of these other organizations that Israel would be okay with. I think that's one of the key parts to this.
The American president also wants a ceasefire. That's something he has made clear time and time again. He's pressing that, of course, now. Do you anticipate movement on that front? And why haven't we seen a ceasefire, considering we did see one early on in the conflict that seemed to work?
Yeah, the ceasefire before, and the tenets of that ceasefire was the idea of getting hostages for Palestinian prisoners with a temporary cease in hostilities. That was what all the negotiations have been, even in the prior weeks leading up to our current day. And that hasn't happened, where Hamas said, no, we want a permanent ceasefire, and Israel says, no, we'll do a temporary. So they've been back and forth on this. But as far as stopping completely, that's where this entire engagement into Rafah is where we're at. And Israel wants to destroy Hamas's infrastructure. And there's about 4,000 Hamas militants that are known to be in Rafah. And I think they really need to get through with this, but they need to do it in a safe way, possibly again with allies, which they entertained before, to make sure that the civilians are safe. That collateral damage, or those, fog of war, like you saw, just taking out these folks, those are the things we want to eliminate. And I think they could do that rather safely, but they do have to prosecute through Rafah.
Do you think the U.S. is ready and willing to curtail support to Israel?
Good question. And here's the interesting part is we're supplying a lot of military equipment to them continuously till today, yet at the same time saying you need to cease fire. So we're doing one with actions, another with words. Like it or not, a variety of different professionals, both military and political, believe that there's a lot of domestic politics being played in there. For example, President Biden is losing the Arab American vote very, very badly because of this. And now we're seeing a very distinct, very hardcore change in this rhetoric in the election year, which is which are impacting international politics. So it's the real question of what is your strategy here? Is it political or is it actual? And that's the issue that's happening right now between the U.S. and Israel.
Glenn Ignazio, good to have you, sir. Thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good to be with you as well. Take care.
Let's get to that.